cold water slammed against my face and ran into the deep creases on my cheeks. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered across the kitchen tiles. My son's voice rose in the air with a sharpness that felt like a blade cutting through my chest. "Do you ever stop taking, old man?" The only sound after that was the dripping water falling from my chin onto the broken pieces at my feet. "My name is Harlan Pierce, and I am 67 years old." I stood in that small kitchen in Rochester, New York, soaked and stunned, with my shirt clinging to my ribs and my silver hair heavy with cold water. I had asked a simple question. I wanted to know if there was any extra chicken left, since my stomach had felt empty all afternoon. Damon, my only child, had been leaning over the kitchen island with his phone in hand, barely listening. I had seen his expression change. The boy I carried on my shoulders, the one who once pressed his small hand into mine and told me he wanted to be just like me, had disappeared long ago. A taller, harsher version had taken his place, wrapped in a designer hoodie I had paid for. His wife, Maura, leaned against the fridge with folded arms. She watched with a faint smile that she made no attempt to hide. The suburban kitchen they called home suddenly felt too small for all of us. I had spoken gently. I was only asking if there might be a little more chicken. The plate was light. Damon's reaction had been immediate. He grabbed a glass, filled it without looking at me, and flung the water straight into my face. The cold struck harder than any slap. "Do you know how much groceries cost?" he shouted. "You live here free. You pay nothing. You just eat and complain. This is not some retirement hotel." The word stole my breath. I had sold my own home 3 years earlier, so they could place a down payment on this one. Damon told me we would live together, so no nursing home would ever come into question. He said it kindly at the time. He held my shoulder with warmth. I believed him because he was my son. I had no reason to think he meant anything else. Maura added her voice, cool and sharp. "You always say you are not hungry. Then you ask for more after everyone is done. It is rude, Harlan." She said my name with the tone of a stranger speaking to another stranger at a counter. She began gathering the shattered glass as if the old man dripping water above her had no presence at all. I touched my wet face. Water slid into my collar. My chest tightened. "I did not mean to be rude," I said quietly. It felt as if the words belonged to someone smaller than me, someone who no longer recognized himself. My eyes drifted to the family photo on the wall. It was taken at a beach in Florida during a trip I had paid for. Damon smiled in that picture. So did Maura. Their daughter Elise held a plastic bucket. The image felt like a memory from a life I was no longer part of. "You never mean it," Damon said, his voice lower now, but still filled with annoyance. "You act like we owe you everything because you are old. This is my house. You want more food, you start paying rent." The word dad never left his mouth. I noticed that. I always noticed. Maura sighed and threw the paper towel into the bin. "You are dripping everywhere. Please go to your room, Harlan. You are making a mess." She said, "Your room," although it was simply a guest room with mismatched furniture and a thin mattress. My clothes lived in plastic drawers. My memories stayed in my head because everything else sat in storage. I walked away from them slowly. My socks squeaked on the tiles. I passed the fridge covered with reminders and ballet schedules that never included my name. The house held no place for me beyond that small room at the end of the hall. Just as I reached the doorway, I heard Damon's voice. "If he keeps this up, we should think about a home, Maura. I am not raising a second child." A soft hum of agreement followed. The words curled into my chest like a cold wire. I had visited my own father in a facility many years ago. The sound of metal trays and tired voices haunted me for months. I had promised myself that I would never die in a place like that. Inside my small room, autumn light fell across the carpet in a pale square. My phone sat on the nightstand next to my reading glasses. My heart still thudded from the shock. I sat on the edge of the bed and studied my hands. They trembled. They looked smaller than I remembered. Once they could lift engine parts without effort. I had worked 39 years in an auto shop, providing every penny I could for Damon's future. I missed birthdays and canceled holidays to work overtime, so he would have more than I did. Now he claimed I took too much. My phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. An email from the bank waited for me. It mentioned joint access to an account Damon and I had opened together when he needed a financial start. My name and his name appeared side by side. I opened it. My hand steadied. My breath slowed. The cold numbness on my face remained, but something beneath it grew sharper. I read about transfers and travel alerts. I read every line twice, then a third time. Laughter floated from the kitchen. Their voices sounded relaxed, sure of their place in the world. They believed the old man at the end of the hall would always accept whatever they offered. I tapped the bank's app with a deliberate touch. The screen lit up, and a quiet certainty settled inside me. Damon had said this was not my home. He believed it completely. Perhaps it was time to show him what that really meant. I woke early the next morning, long before the house stirred. A dull ache moved through my shoulders as I rose from the narrow bed. The cold autumn light crept through the blinds and painted thin stripes across the carpet. The night had given me few hours of real sleep. My mind had replayed every detail of the scene in the kitchen. Each time I drifted toward rest, the sound of Damon's voice dragged me back. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the light shift as the sun climbed above the neighborhood roofs. A retirement community set only a few miles from here. I remembered passing it once. The thought of entering a place like that made my stomach turn. I had worked my whole life to avoid that fate. The promise Damon made had seemed solid then. A man imagines his own child will keep their word, particularly after all the years that child spent leaning on him for support. The phone sat beside me, still displaying the bank app one had opened the night before. My name remained listed as the primary account holder. Damon had never bothered to change it. His confidence in my passivity had made him careless. It struck me that he had lived with the belief that my age had plucked all fight out of me. The realization settled inside me in a quiet, steady way. I rose, washed my face, and changed into a clean shirt. The cracked mirror in the corner reflected a man older than he felt. My hair had thinned, my jaw had softened, and my eyes carried the heavy mark of tired years. A person might have pitied such a sight. I did not. A lifetime of work had weathered my body, yet it had never touched the part of me that still thought of solutions, still judged outcomes, still learned from past mistakes. The house remained silent as I stepped into the hallway. I moved with slow care. The kitchen carried a faint scent of last night's dinner. The broken glass had been cleared completely. No trace of the moment remained, except the memory that now lived in me. Damon had always been quick to clean physical messes. Emotional ones he preferred to ignore. His temper, his entitlement, and his coldness were, in his mind, problems created by someone else. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a new message. It came from the same bank, a verification notification. My thumb hovered over the screen. A plan had begun to take shape in my mind, although I could not yet see every step clearly. I only knew that I could no longer depend on this house or the people within it. I needed to think of a way to reclaim my life before I lost the last parts of it that still felt like mine. The kitchen door squeaked softly behind me as I entered. Damon sat at the table, eating cereal and staring at his phone. The morning light cast shadows under his eyes. He looked older than his 36 years, worn by small annoyances that he treated like great burdens. Maura poured coffee by the machine. Neither of them looked at me. I took a seat at the far end of the table without speaking. Damon's eyes flicked upward briefly, then returned to his phone. I did not expect kindness. I only needed space to think. I stirred the oatmeal that I made on the stove. The grains clung to the spoon in heavy lumps. My appetite had not returned. Maura broke the quiet first. "We need to talk later, Harlan," she said. Her voice held that same cool tone. "Damon and I have been thinking about some things." I felt the words before she finished them. A meeting. They had decided something. I nodded once. "I will listen." Damon scoffed. "You say that, then you act surprised every time we bring up what needs to change." I kept my gaze fixed on the oatmeal. "I will listen," I repeated. The room sank into silence again. Damon stood after finishing his cereal and left the bowl in the sink without rinsing it. He stepped past me without a word. Maura followed, carrying her mug. Their footsteps traveled toward the living room, then faded. A thin line of tension coiled around my spine. I knew what they planned to say. I knew the direction this path was heading. They would bring up the cost of groceries, then the cost of utilities, then the fact that I occupied a room that could become an office or a spare room for guests. Their irritation had grown steadily over the year. Each small moment chipped away at the illusion that I still belonged in their world. I needed to think with more clarity than I had in months. I finished the oatmeal, washed the bowl carefully, and returned to my room. The door clicked shut behind me, and the muted quiet returned. I sat in the corner with my notebook. Its pages held old sketches of engine parts, diagrams from years in the shop, numbers from the sale of my house, and small reminders to call doctors or refill prescriptions. The notebook had once been a companion during long nights after my wife passed. I turned to a blank page. The bank account contained more than Damon realized. He believed the remaining funds sat at barely enough to matter. He never asked about the accounts my wife and I kept separate during our marriage. She had insisted on building several long-term savings accounts. She believed we needed protection in case anything happened. She had never doubted Damon, but she had learned the value of caution from her own childhood. I had kept her accounts alive. Damon had no knowledge of them. I drew a slow breath and wrote a list of actions I could take. Travel arrangements, banking transfers, contact details of an old friend who owned a small cabin in Montana. The cabin sat near a lake where I had once taught Damon to fish. I wondered if he remembered that day. The memory remained vivid in my mind. The sun on the water, the small trout in his hands, his smile as he shouted my name. The thought of that child felt like a dream now. I closed the notebook and looked around the room. My life had shrunk to this: a narrow bed, a plastic drawer, a small desk, and a window that faced a fence. My clothes had lost shape from being folded in cramped spaces. My shoes leaned together in the corner as though preparing to give up. I reached for the bank app again and entered the codes. The first transfer required verification. I entered it. The funds moved. A message flashed across the screen, confirming the new balance. A strange calm washed through me. It did not feel like revenge. It felt like survival. My son believed that age weakened the mind. He had mistaken quiet endurance for helplessness. I heard a knock at the door. Maura's voice came through the wood. "Harlan, can we talk now?" I slipped the phone into my pocket and opened the door. She stood with her arms folded, her expression built from concern and control. Damon sat in the living room, waiting. I took the chair across from them. The scene reminded me of many talks I had with Damon when he was a boy. He sat in that same posture then, impatient and unwilling to accept responsibility. I had spoken with patience and warmth in those years. I had believed time would shape him into a better man. Maura cleared her throat. "We need to think about the future. The arrangement we have is not working. We care about you, but this situation is becoming too much. Damon feels overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed. It might be healthier for you to move into a care home." She spoke gently but not kindly. Damon added, "You need help we cannot provide. You forget things. You expect too much. You make this house stressful." I watched him carefully. His words held no guilt. His posture relaxed. He had rehearsed this. I let silence stretch between us before I answered. "I understand," I said. They looked surprised. Damon blinked. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "I understand completely." I rose slowly, steadying myself with a hand on the armrest. My legs ached slightly, yet my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I could see the path ahead. I could feel the next steps forming under my feet. Damon looked relieved. Maura gave a small nod, already imagining the room without me. I stepped back toward my door. They did not know that I had already begun to remove myself from this house. They did not know that I had contacted the bank. They did not know that plans had been set in motion hours earlier. I closed the door behind me and sat on the bed again. My breath steadied. My heart stayed calm. The house outside carried the ordinary noise of life. Footsteps, a television flickering, light conversation. A quiet certainty grew within me. My departure would come soon. It would not be the kind they expected. They had wanted control. They had wanted convenience. They had wanted an easy way to push me aside. The world rarely gives people what they expect. I woke before sunrise again, although I had slept a little deeper than the night before. The weight on my chest remained, yet something inside my mind had begun to settle into shape. The decision to leave no longer felt like a sudden reaction to pain. It felt like the right path, one that had been waiting for me long before Damon threw that water in my face. The house stayed quiet as I moved through the early light. A faint hum from the refrigerator filled the silence. The air carried the dry chill that came before winter in upstate New York. My joints ached more than usual, although I suspected this had little to do with the temperature and more to do with everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. I reached for the notebook again. The pages from the night before lay open, filled with small lists and notes. I studied them slowly. Montana stood out in my mind. The lake near the cabin glimmered in my memory. I had visited that place only twice since my wife passed. The silence there felt different. It felt wide, deep and honest. The mountains held no judgment. The water held no resentment. A person could breathe differently in surroundings like that. I needed to travel soon. The account I had emptied would not stay unnoticed for long. Damon might not check his balance every day, yet he checked it enough to know when something large had changed. He would not suspect that the man he called a burden had moved with such speed. His certainty in his own superiority blinded him. He had grown to trust my passivity more than he trusted numbers. I closed the notebook and began to pack the few possessions I cared to bring. The plastic drawers held shirts that had lost most of their color, trousers that sagged at the waist, and socks worn thin near the toes. I chose only what I needed. A sturdy pair of jeans, 2 flannel shirts, thick socks for the cold, my jacket, and my old hiking boots. My wife had bought those boots for me years ago. The leather had softened with use. They reminded me of long walks with her during autumns when Damon was still a boy. A quiet knock came at the door. I paused. My heart tightened slightly, although I kept my voice steady. Yes. The door opened without waiting for a reply. Damon stepped inside. His gaze swept across the room. The morning light caught the small lines at the corners of his eyes. He looked tired, yet his expression carried a touch of satisfaction, as if he believed he had won a silent argument the day before. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded. "Then sit." He remained standing. "You took what Mora and I said better than I expected. I thought you would argue." "I have no interest in arguing," I said softly. He looked surprised. "Good. Because this is the best thing for everyone." I watched him closely. People reveal themselves most fully when they believe they have won. Damon's posture loosened. His shoulders dropped. He ran a hand through his hair. He had always done that when he felt sure of himself. He did it before high school exams when he had not studied. He did it before job interviews when he believed charm mattered more than preparation. He did it now because he thought I had surrendered to his will. "I looked up a place," he said. "A home near the edge of town. It is not cheap, but they have a room available soon. We can talk about payment once you get settled." I stayed silent. My expression remained neutral. He took my silence as agreement. "I know this is hard, Dad. You have been trying to manage things on your own, but it is time to accept that you need more help." I felt the word "dad" cut in a different way this time. He used it only when he wanted to appear compassionate. I had once taken comfort in that word. Years had changed its meaning. "I appreciate your concern," I said after a moment. "But I have other plans." The shift in his face occurred instantly. His eyes narrowed. His stance stiffened. "What plans?" "I will be leaving soon. I have arrangements to make." His jaw tightened. "Leaving where?" "I will let you know when I arrive," I said. He shook his head. "This is not a choice you get to make. You cannot live alone. You think you can, but you cannot. You forget things. You slow everything down. You cost us time and money." The words stung, although not with the same force as the night before. Something inside me had already begun to detach from him. I no longer heard his voice with the ears of a father. I listened to him the way a stranger listens to someone explaining a situation they never truly understood. "I managed fine for 67 years before this house," I replied. "I will manage fine again." His mouth twisted. "Do not talk like that. You are acting irrationally." "Irrational?" I asked gently. "No, I am thinking clearly." He stepped closer. "Where is this coming from? Yesterday you seemed fine with the plan." I said I understood. I answered. "I never said I accepted it." He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it. He studied my face. Perhaps he noticed something different in my expression. Perhaps he sensed that a boundary had formed between us that had not existed before. "You cannot just walk out," he said. "You do not have anywhere to go. You do not have money to travel. You need us." The last sentence revealed everything. He expected me to depend on him. He wanted control. Dependence made him feel powerful. "I will leave soon," I repeated. "I will not ask for permission." A flash of anger crossed his face. "You cannot make it without help. You think you can, but you are older now." "I am older," I agreed quietly. "I am not helpless." The silence that followed pressed thickly around us. Damon stared at me with a mixture of frustration and confusion. He had spent years believing the worst parts of my age defined me. The sudden change unsettled him. He turned abruptly and walked out without another word. The door closed hard behind him. I stood still for a long moment. My heart thumped faster, although my mind remained clear. The time had come to move. If I waited, Damon would push harder. If I hesitated, he would try to control the situation. I needed to leave before he discovered what I had done with the bank account. I resumed packing. A small bag held everything I planned to take. My wife's old locket rested in my hand for several seconds. Its chain felt cool against my skin. I placed it carefully in the side pocket of the bag. Her handwriting on the small note inside had faded slightly, yet every letter remained with me. She had written one sentence. Keep choosing kindness, but do not forget yourself. I zipped the bag and sat for a moment on the edge of the bed. My chest tightened with a quiet sadness. Leaving a place still carries pain, even when the place has turned cold. I thought of the early years with Damon. I thought of teaching him how to ride a bike, guiding his small hands on the handlebars. I thought of the nights I stayed awake helping him finish homework. I thought of watching him sleep after a fever, touching his forehead with worry and love. Love does not vanish, yet it can grow distant, like the memory of a warm summer day during winter. I stood and lifted the bag. My joints protested. I slid the strap across my shoulder and took one last look around the room. The walls stood bare. The furniture looked borrowed. Nothing in the space held any part of me. The real remnants of my life had traveled with me in memory and in the notebook. Voices drifted through the hallway. Damon spoke softly to Mora. I could not make out the words, although their tone carried irritation. I opened the door and stepped into the hall. My steps made little sound on the carpet. The living room came into view. Damon and Mora turned to look at me. Their eyes settled on the bag. You are not serious, Damon said. I am, I replied. Mora folded her arms. Where do you plan to go? I will be safe, I answered. That is all you need to know. Damon moved as if to block my way. I lifted a hand. Do not. The tone of that single word made him pause. I walked past them. The cool air from the front door brushed against my skin. My hand closed on the handle. Damon spoke again. If you walk out that door, do not expect us to come looking for you. I turned slightly. I know. His eyes flashed with something like fear, though he tried to hide it. My voice stayed calm. Take care of yourselves. I opened the door. The morning air filled my lungs. The world outside stood wide and full of possibility. My heart felt heavy and light at the same time. Age had taken some things from me, yet it had given me clarity. The path ahead had already begun to form. My feet stepped onto it with a steady rhythm, and I did not look back. The consequences of my departure would arrive soon enough, and Damon would learn the truth in his own time. The bus station sat 3 blocks from the house, tucked between a hardware store and a small diner that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I walked at a slow pace with my bag over my shoulder. The morning light remained pale, and the pavement glistened slightly with the dew that lingered overnight. My steps felt heavier than usual, although each one carried a sense of release. A man can feel the weight of a lifetime and still choose to move forward. I reached the station and took a seat on a metal bench. The cold traveled through my jacket, but I did not mind. The quiet around me brought a strange comfort. A few people waited nearby. A woman in a red coat scrolled through her phone. An older man in a cap sipped something steaming from a paper cup. No one looked at me. The absence of attention felt gentle and freeing. The next bus would not arrive for another 20 minutes. I used the time to breathe and gather my thoughts. A moment like this comes rarely in life. A moment where a person steps away from everything familiar and stands on the edge of something unknown. Some might fear such a step. I felt an unexpected calm, as though my mind had already traveled ahead of my body and cleared a path. The wind carried the scent of early frost. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. I thought of Damon and Mora then, not with anger, not with longing. The memory of their faces felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else's story. I wondered if Damon had returned to the kitchen after I left, checked the drawer where bills were kept, or opened the banking app on his phone. The moment he discovered the missing funds would arrive soon. I imagined the shock. I imagined the silence that followed. He would realize then that the man he had dismissed as weak still remembered how to protect himself. A bus pulled into the station across the road. Its brakes hissed. A handful of passengers stepped out. One of them, a girl in a blue hoodie, glanced at me with brief curiosity. Children and teenagers often see more than adults. They notice details adults overlook. She offered a small nod. I returned it with a faint smile. The bus I waited for arrived with a gentle rumble. A driver stepped out and began checking tickets. I rose to my feet, slung my bag into place, and joined the line. The driver, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked at my ticket, and waved me on. The interior of the bus carried the familiar scent of worn fabric and old air. My seat faced a window with slight scratches across the glass. I placed my bag beside my feet and settled in. The engine vibrated beneath the floor. The motion of travel soothed something inside me. A journey has a way of loosening the grip of the past. The road stretched ahead in a long line of autumn colors. Trees along the highway shifted from orange to brown as the bus moved west. I watched the scenery pass and thought back to a conversation from years ago. My wife had once said that life gives a person several chances to choose again. She believed in renewal, even in later years. Her voice remained clear in my memory, warm and steady. A notification buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated before checking it. The screen lit up with several missed calls and 2 messages from Damon. I opened none of them. I placed the phone face down and let the noise fade. My heart felt a quiet ache, yet the ache no longer held me captive. Love for a child does not vanish in a day, although it can shift and take new shape when tested. A parent realizes at some point that love cannot survive alone. Respect must stand with it. The bus continued along the highway, passing farm stalls, wide fields, and small clusters of houses with peeling paint. I saw a sign for a river I had visited many years ago with Damon. He had been 12 then, full of energy and questions. He had asked me if fish slept at night. I told him they rested, but in their own way. His laughter had rung across the water. The memory returned like a small light, then dimmed slowly as the bus drove on. I do not know how long I watched the fields before fatigue settled into my bones. My eyelids grew heavy. I allowed myself to close them. Sleep came in short waves, each interrupted by the soft turn of the bus or the murmur of passengers. A man beside me coughed occasionally. A child 2 rows ahead whispered questions to her mother. These sounds drifted in and out of my rest like gentle currents. I woke again near midday as the bus pulled into a service station. Most passengers stepped off to buy snacks or stretch their legs. I remained seated for a moment, gathering myself. The sunlight had grown stronger and now cast warm patterns across the aisle. I rose slowly, careful of my stiff joints, and made my way outside. The service station rested near a line of tall pines. The air carried the clean scent of needles and petrol. I bought a cup of tea from the vending area and leaned against a wooden railing while sipping it. The warmth spread through my hands. A memory rose in my mind of my wife making tea in our old kitchen, humming softly. She always said that tea tasted better when made with calm hands. Her voice floated through me gently, almost like a whisper. A man approached the railing and nodded politely. He appeared to be in his early 50s, in work trousers and a jacket with paint stains. He glanced at my bag and smiled faintly. Long trip? Yes, I answered. Longer than I expected. Going somewhere new? He asked. In a way, I said quietly. He did not pry further. He took a sip from his coffee and watched the road. His presence felt comfortable. Sometimes strangers hold a softer space than family. We stood in silence until the call came to board the bus again. He raised a hand in a small farewell gesture. I returned it. The bus rolled on. Afternoon light spilled across the road in long streaks. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm. A sense of direction grew within me. Not in the literal sense of north or west, but a deeper direction, one that guided my thoughts and choices. A sudden memory surfaced then. The last day I held my wife's hand. She lay in the hospital room, surrounded by the soft beeping of machines. Her eyes met mine with clarity, even though her voice had weakened. She told me to keep living after she left. She asked me not to shrink my world. She said Damon would need guidance, yet she also warned me to guard my own peace. I had forgotten that last part. I had wrapped my entire life around raising a child who believed he deserved everything without giving anything in return. The bus turned toward a small town where I would change routes. The town sat quietly among hills that rolled like gentle waves. Houses with faded paint lined the streets. A railway station stood on the far side, although few people waited there. I stepped onto the pavement with my bag and felt the cool breeze brush my face. My next bus would not arrive for another hour. I walked toward a bench near the station entrance. The wood had weathered from years of sun and rain. I rested there and let my thoughts stretch out. The path ahead seemed clearer. The cabin in Montana would offer shelter and silence. I could live simply. I could breathe differently. I could remember my wife without the noise of conflict. I could reclaim pieces of myself that had become small in Damon's house. Movement caught my eye. A young woman with dark braids carried a toddler across the station. The child reached toward a pigeon on the ground with delight in his face. The mother laughed softly and shifted him to her other hip. The scene stirred something inside me, a reminder that not all families lose tenderness. The hour passed quietly. I boarded the next bus with steady steps. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting warm colors across the windows. The landscape changed slowly as we traveled deeper into the countryside. A sense of purpose settled in my chest. Damon would soon face the truth of what he had done. His anger would rise. His voice would thunder. His certainty would collapse. I did not wish him harm, although he would feel the consequences of his choices. Life teaches through experience in ways words cannot reach. My journey continued into the evening. The bus lights flickered on. The world outside turned dark and quiet. My reflection appeared faintly in the window. I looked older than before, yet I saw something new in my eyes. A small glow, a trace of strength that had been waiting beneath the surface. This path belonged to me now, and I would follow it wherever it led. The next town appeared just after dusk, its lights glowing softly against the dark line of the horizon. The bus slowed as we approached the station. My legs felt stiff when I stood, and I gripped the seat in front of me to steady myself. The air outside carried the bite of early winter, sharper than it had been that morning. My breath misted as I stepped onto the pavement. The driver nodded at me in a quiet gesture of farewell, and the bus pulled away in a blur of headlights. I tightened my jacket around my shoulders and looked around. The station sat at the edge of a small community. A row of shops lined the street, their windows glowing faintly. A bakery displayed a sign advertising cinnamon rolls. A hardware store stood beside it with its lights off. A small motel sat across the road. Its neon sign flickered in a tired rhythm, half lit and half dim. I walked toward the motel, carrying my bag. My limbs felt heavy, although my thoughts remained clear. The room I rented smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. The bed sagged slightly in the middle. The lamp on the nightstand flickered when I turned it on. A place like that seldom leaves a lasting impression, although it offered what I needed: shelter, quiet, and time to plan. I placed my bag on the chair and sat on the bed. My phone vibrated again. The screen showed 6 missed calls and several messages. Damon would not stay quiet now. I opened the notifications and read the most recent message. "What did you do?" The words appeared without greeting or explanation. The message after that carried more urgency. "Call me now." Then another. "This is serious. You cannot do this." I sat with the phone resting in my palm. My heartbeat stayed calm, although a thin ache formed behind my ribs. I had expected this moment. Damon relied on control, and losing access to money would unsettle him deeply. His anger had always risen quickly, although it came from fear more than cruelty. The fear of losing comfort. The fear of losing convenience. The fear of losing a sense of superiority he had grown accustomed to. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and let silence fill the room. A moment like this tests a man. A person can fall into guilt when confronted with a child's anger, even when the child has caused the hurt. I forced myself to breathe steadily and keep the truth of the situation in sight. Damon had treated me like an obligation. He had spoken to me in ways he would never tolerate from others. He had shown comfort only when it benefited him. A sound drifted through the thin walls. A television from the next room played a sitcom laugh track. The sharp contrast between that artificial cheer and the heaviness in my chest pulled a faint smile from me. Life has a strange way of mixing tones. I rose from the bed and opened the curtains. The street outside glowed under the amber light of tall lamps. The cold settled more deeply into the air. I watched a man walk his dog along the pavement. The dog's tail swayed with an easy rhythm. Simple moments often carry more truth than complicated ones. I needed to decide where to go next. The journey to Montana remained long, and I still needed to change buses in the morning. I opened my notebook and wrote a few lines. Departure time, possible route options, reminders for food and water. The act of writing calmed me. Each stroke of the pen formed a step toward the life I intended to build. A memory surfaced then, uninvited yet welcome. I remembered my wife standing in our old garden, trimming the rose bushes. Her hair moved softly in the breeze. She looked over her shoulder and smiled at me with quiet understanding. She always said that life required pruning. She meant that a person sometimes needed to cut away what caused harm so new growth could emerge. Her words returned now with a clarity I had not felt in years. I closed the notebook and rested it on my lap. The warmth from the lamp cast a soft glow across its cover. My chest settled. A knock sounded at the door. I froze for a moment. My heart beat faster. I walked to the door and opened it slowly. A woman stood outside with a laundry basket in her arms. She wore a uniform with the motel's name stitched into the collar. She smiled when she saw me. "Sorry to disturb you. I forgot to leave fresh towels earlier," she said. "Thought you might need some." I nodded. "Thank you. That is kind." She handed them to me. Her eyes held a softness I had not seen in some time. She must have noticed the tiredness on my face because she paused. "You traveling far?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "A long way." She nodded in understanding. "Safe journey then. Nights can feel lonely when you are on the road, but mornings always make things a little clearer." Her words held a quiet truth. I thanked her again and closed the door gently. The room felt lighter after she left. A small gesture can shift the air in a place. I placed the towels on the chair and sat again. My phone buzzed once more. Damon had sent another message. "This is your last chance to explain yourself." I did not open it. My hand hovered over the phone for a moment before I powered it off completely. The silence that followed felt deep and steady. My heart eased. I lay back on the bed with the thin blanket pulled over me. The ceiling above carried faint marks of age. The sound of cars passing outside created a gentle background hum. My eyes drifted closed, although my mind remained awake. The truth of the situation settled fully inside me. I had stepped away from a life that no longer served me. I had chosen the harder path because it held dignity. I had reclaimed my freedom, not in anger, but in self-preservation. The consequences of that choice would unfold in ways I could not yet see, although I sensed that this journey carried a quiet strength. Sleep found me eventually, and I rested more deeply than I had in months. My dreams were not heavy or troubled. They carried images of mountains, lakes, open skies, and the faint sound of my wife's laughter rising through the air like a gentle echo. A new chapter of my life awaited me when morning came. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains and settled across the room in pale stripes. I woke slowly, feeling a steadiness in my chest that had been absent for a long time. The motel remained quiet at that early hour. A faint sound of water pipes rattled somewhere behind the wall. My body felt stiff, although not with the same heaviness that followed the scene in Damon's kitchen. This stiffness came from travel, from change, from steps taken toward something unknown but necessary. I sat up, placed my feet on the worn carpet, and let the cool air clear the last traces of sleep from my mind. The phone on the nightstand remained silent and dark. I did not switch it on. My thoughts needed space before I faced whatever messages waited for me. I moved slowly, washed my face, and prepared to leave. The towels the woman had brought the previous night lay folded neatly on the chair. That small gesture lingered in my mind. Kindness from strangers often carries more weight than expectation from family. I packed my bag and stepped outside. The cold morning air wrapped itself around me. Frost coated the grass in a thin layer that sparkled under the rising sun. The town felt peaceful at that hour. A bakery sign flickered as a worker unlocked the door. Warm air drifted out along with the faint scent of pastry. My stomach tightened with hunger, although I had money for only what I needed to reach Montana. I bought a single piece of bread, still warm, and carried it with me toward the station. The bus shelter stood quiet except for a man sweeping fallen leaves into a pile. He nodded at me as I approached. His clothes were worn and his hands rough from labor. The work seemed thankless, although he carried it out with calm focus. I returned his nod and took a seat on the bench. A few minutes later, the first bus of the day approached with a growl of its engine. I boarded and found a seat near the back. The roads carried a gentle rhythm as we left the town behind. Fields stretched across the landscape like blank pages waiting to be written upon. My thoughts filled the silence. I considered what Damon must be thinking now. His messages would have grown sharper through the night. His fear would have turned into anger. His confidence would have cracked. The part of me that still held the memory of his childhood felt a small ache, although another part felt relieved that he would finally understand the consequences of neglect. The journey pressed on. I watched small farms pass by, their barns painted in faded colors. Horses grazed in fields near fences that leaned slightly from years of weather. The simplicity of those scenes eased my mind. A quieter life waited ahead, and I felt ready to meet it. The bus reached a larger stop just before noon. I stepped off and checked the schedule posted near the station door. My next bus would arrive in an hour. I used the time to buy tea from a small cafe at the corner. The interior smelled of roasted beans and warm bread. A radio played quietly near the counter. I carried my tea to a table near the window. A couple sat at a nearby booth. They appeared to be in their late 70s, speaking softly while sharing a plate of pancakes. Their hands rested close together on the table. The sight stirred something warm in my chest. My wife and I had shared similar mornings in small cafes when money was tight. Those quiet moments held more meaning than any grand event. The memory of her gentle smile rose again in my mind, steady and comforting. I sipped the tea slowly and watched the street outside. A light wind swayed the branches of the trees. Cars moved along the road at an unhurried pace. Life in that town seemed to unfold with less urgency. A person could grow old there without feeling invisible. The hour passed quietly. I returned to the station and waited. The bus arrived with a soft hiss of air as the doors opened. I boarded and settled in again. A feeling of anticipation grew inside me. The further I traveled, the clearer the path ahead became. A woman carrying a baby sat across the aisle. The child looked at me with wide, curious eyes. His small hand reached toward me. The woman smiled apologetically. I offered a gentle smile in return. The sight of that small hand reminded me of Damon as an infant. He once clung to my finger with the same determination. The memory of that early bond sat tenderly in my thoughts. A person does not forget the first time their child recognizes their voice. Love begins long before a child learns how to return it. The road stretched on for hours. Hills rose and fell in the distance. The sky shifted from pale blue to soft gray. A light drizzle touched the windows, blurring the scenery into faint smudges of color. I watched the droplets slide down the glass. The world outside looked muted, although the movement of the bus kept me anchored. I allowed my mind to drift back to the years after my wife died. Damon had been distant then, already shaping his life in ways I could not guide. I remember offering him support, money, time, and advice. He accepted everything with the ease of someone who believed it would always be there. He rarely asked about my well-being. I had told myself that he was young, that he would grow into kindness. The years proved otherwise. The bus reached the next stop in late afternoon. I stepped off and found shelter under a roofed bench. The town seemed smaller than the one before. Fewer shops, fewer people. The air carried the earthy scent of rain. I checked the map posted near the bench and followed the route I had marked in my notebook. A train would take me across a longer stretch of distance. The station lay a short walk away. The train platform felt colder than the bus stations. The wind swept across in sharp gusts. A handful of travelers stood waiting, their coats pulled tight around them. I sat on a metal bench and rested my bag at my feet. My breath fogged the air. The platform lights flickered on as the sky darkened. I reached for my phone then. My fingers hesitated before pressing the power button. The screen lit up with notifications. Damon had sent more messages. Some carried anger. Others carried panic. One message read, "Dad, answer me. This is not you." Another said, "Just tell me where you went." The last message had fewer words. "Please." I stared at that one for a long moment. The word carried a tone he rarely used. A tone that reminded me of the child he once was. The ache in my chest returned, although not with the same heaviness. A parent can feel pain and clarity at the same time. I placed the phone in my pocket and kept it switched on. I made no move to reply. He needed to feel the silence. He needed to understand the weight of his actions. His lesson would not come from anger. It would come from absence. The train approached the platform with a deep rumble. Its headlights cut through the dark like a path being revealed. My heart steadied. I lifted my bag, rose from the bench, and stepped toward the open doors. The journey continued. The train carried a steady rhythm that settled into my bones as evening stretched across the sky. I found a seat near the window and placed my bag beside my feet. The carriage felt warmer than the platform. A soft hum filled the air, accompanied by the occasional rattle as the wheels met the tracks. The lights above cast a gentle glow that eased the tension in my shoulders. I watched the town drift away behind me until the landscape blurred into open fields and quiet stretches of forest. A conductor passed through the aisle and checked tickets with polite efficiency. He nodded at me, and I offered a faint smile in return. My thoughts drifted once his footsteps faded. The distance between myself and Damon grew with every mile. A strange mix of sadness and relief stirred inside me. A parent can love deeply and still recognize when stepping away becomes necessary. The ache remained, although it no longer controlled my choices. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I let it ring twice before taking it out. The screen showed Damon's name again. I watched it until the ringing stopped. Another message arrived seconds later. I do not understand. Tell me what you want. I placed the phone face down on the table and let the train's movement calm me. A person cannot answer messages written in panic and expect reason to follow. Damon needed time. I needed space. The silence between us had grown into something that neither of us could shape easily. The scenery changed as the train moved. The last traces of town lights faded until only darkness surrounded the windows. A few passengers slept with their heads leaning against the glass. A young man listened to music through headphones. An older woman knitted with slow, practiced movements. Her presence felt steady, almost comforting. I watched her for a while. The gentle rise and fall of the needles reminded me of evenings with my wife when she crocheted blankets for neighbors and family friends. She always said that small acts of care mattered more than grand gestures. A soft announcement echoed through the carriage. The train would stop at a larger city soon. I would need to change lines and continue west. I closed my eyes for a moment and gathered my breath. Travel had worn my body, although it strengthened my mind. A man my age carries his years in his bones, yet he can hold determination in his heart. That thought anchored me. The train slowed as it approached the station. Lights spread across the platform in neat rows. I rose from my seat, lifted my bag, and stepped into the cold night. The station felt larger than any I had passed through since leaving home. Voices echoed across the wide hall. Announcements rang out from speakers above. People moved with purpose, some rushing with bags, others walking in steady lines. I found a bench near a timetable display and sat. My breath formed faint clouds in the air. I checked the schedule again. The next train toward Montana would depart in 1 hour. A sleepless night lay ahead, although I felt ready for it. The silence inside me had grown into something strong. A quiet thread of confidence wound through my thoughts. A man in a heavy coat sat at the opposite end of the bench. He glanced at me, offered a polite nod, and took out a sandwich wrapped in paper. He seemed to hesitate before speaking. "Long journey?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. He smiled. "You look like someone who knows where they are headed." "I know where I need to go," I said. He nodded as if he understood the difference and returned to his meal. His presence felt easy, a rare comfort in a place filled with hurried footsteps. My thoughts drifted again. I remembered the years after my wife's death when Damon visited less and less. He always carried an excuse. Work, friends, travel. He often left quickly after arriving. I told myself that young people build busy lives. I never imagined that the distance would harden into something heavier. The memory struck with both sadness and clarity. It taught me something I should have learned sooner. Love without boundaries becomes a weight that bends the spine of the one who gives. Time passed, and the next announcement called passengers forward. I rose and followed the line toward the platform. Cold air swept across the walkway. The train waited with a low hum. I boarded and found a seat near the back, where the carriage felt quieter. The lights flickered once before settling. A few minutes later, the train began to move. The city lights faded behind tall buildings, then dipped beneath the horizon. Darkness returned outside, although warmth spread through the carriage as passengers settled in for the long night. I leaned back and rested my head against the seat. Fatigue crept into my limbs. My eyes closed briefly. Sleep rose and fell in small waves. An hour passed before I checked my phone again. Damon had sent a message with fewer words this time. "I am scared." The sight of those words tightened my throat. He had used that tone rarely in adulthood. He had spent years emphasizing strength and hiding vulnerability. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Part of me wanted to reply. Another part recognized that a parent must sometimes withhold answers so a child can finally face himself. I placed the phone back in my pocket. The lights inside the carriage dimmed as night deepened. Passengers slept in various postures, wrapped in jackets and scarves. The soft sound of breathing filled the space. The train moved steadily, carrying all of us toward places unknown. I turned my gaze to the window. My reflection stared back at me, faint and softened by the glass. A man of 67 with silver hair, worn lines across his forehead, and a quiet strength still alive in his eyes. The years had shaped me, hurt me, tested me, yet they had not emptied me. My wife used to say that a person's worth is measured not by how loudly they stand, but by how firmly they continue walking when the ground shifts beneath them. I finally understood her words with full clarity. The hum of the train soothed my thoughts. My body relaxed into the seat. A faint smile touched my face. I had stepped out of the life that tried to confine me. I had taken back what remained of my future. Each mile carried me toward a place where I could rebuild peace. A faint glow of dawn appeared far ahead through the window. The journey continued. The faint glow on the horizon widened slowly until the first edges of dawn colored the sky. I opened my eyes and sat upright, feeling the familiar stiffness in my spine. The night on the train had been long, although the steady rhythm of the carriage offered a strange kind of comfort. Passengers stirred around me. A few rubbed sleep from their eyes. Others reached for bags or coats. The world outside shifted from darkness to a soft gray that stretched across wide plains. I leaned forward and looked through the window. The land appeared vast and open, dotted with low hills and scattered trees. A quiet sense of arrival settled in my chest. The train would soon reach the junction where I needed to step off and make the final part of the journey. A small town near the Montana border waited ahead, unfamiliar yet promising. The thought of new surroundings steadied my breath. The train slowed as it approached the platform. I lifted my bag and joined the line of passengers moving toward the exit. Cold air swept in as the doors opened. The breath left my lungs in a soft cloud when I stepped outside. The sky held streaks of pale gold. The air tasted clean. My feet carried me across the platform with a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. I entered the small station building and checked the notice board. A shuttle bus would leave in half an hour toward a town near the place where the cabin stood. I took a seat on a wooden bench and allowed my body to rest. The journey had been long, yet it carried a sense of clarity. Each step had peeled away a layer of the old life I left behind. The weight that once pressed on my chest felt lighter now. My phone vibrated again. I had switched it back on during the night. The screen showed several messages, all from Damon. The most recent one read, "Please answer. I need to talk to you." I stared at the words and felt a quiet shift inside me. A parent's instinct does not vanish, even when the bond has fractured. I opened the message and read it twice. The tone had changed completely. The anger had drained. The confidence had vanished. Only fear remained. I felt a pull at the edge of my heart. A memory rose of Damon as a boy, running through the yard with grass stains on his trousers. He fell once, scraped his knee, and cried. I lifted him then, held him close and told him he would be safe. That version of him felt distant now, although the memory had not faded. I typed a short reply. I am safe. I hesitated, then added, "You need time to think." I do as well. I read the words before sending them. The message held no anger. It carried only truth. I placed the phone back in my pocket and released a long breath. The shuttle bus arrived with a soft hiss. I boarded and chose a seat near the window. The driver nodded in greeting. The bus moved along narrow roads lined with tall pines. The scenery grew richer with each mile. Hills rose and fell like gentle waves. Streams cut through stretches of forest. The landscape carried a silence that felt older than anything I had known in recent years. I thought of the cabin as the bus traveled. My friend, Owen, had mentioned it many times in the past. He inherited it from his father and always kept it as a place of retreat. He lived in California now, although he assured me the cabin remained empty and available whenever I needed it. His voice came back to me with calm certainty. You will find peace there. You always did. The bus reached a small stop near the edge of a lake. The water stretched out peacefully, still under the morning light. I stepped off the bus and began walking down a gravel path. The air grew colder near the shore. My boots crunched softly against the stones. I followed the path until the cabin came into view. The sight of it brought a calm that traveled through me. The wooden structure stood sturdy among the trees. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. No lights shone in the windows. The place carried the smell of old timber and pine needles. My hand rested on the railing of the porch. I climbed the steps slowly, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The interior held a simple layout. A small table, a fireplace, a bed near the wall, and shelves lined with old books and tools. The cabin carried the quiet hum of a place that had not held human presence in weeks. I set my bag down and stood still. The silence wrapped itself around me, warm and steady. The fireplace remained cold, although wood lay stacked neatly beside it. I knelt, arranged a few logs, and lit a small flame. The warmth spread gently. Light danced across the room in shifting patterns. I sat on a chair near the fire and held my hands close to the heat. A sense of belonging settled deeper into my chest. A knock sounded against the door. The sound made me turn quickly, although it carried no threat. A ranger stood outside. He appeared to be in his 60s with a calm face and kind eyes. He greeted me with a polite nod. "Morning. You must be Mr. Pierce. Owen mentioned you might arrive." His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew the land well. I nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate the welcome." He smiled. "We keep an eye on the place when no one is here. If you need anything, the ranger post is half a mile up the path. You will find maps, supplies, and company if you ever feel lonely." His kindness eased the last remnants of tension in my shoulders. We spoke a little more about weather patterns, hiking trails, and the wildlife nearby. He left after offering a final nod. The door closed quietly behind him. I stood alone in the cabin with the fire warming the room. My breath settled into a calm rhythm. My thoughts grew clearer. The past no longer pressed as heavily against me. The weight of Damon's words still lingered, although they no longer defined my steps. I sat again and opened my notebook. The blank page waited patiently. I wrote a single line first. "A new life begins with quiet choices." The words looked simple on the page. They carried more truth than many long speeches. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up slowly. Damon had replied to my earlier message. His words came clearer now. "I am sorry. I did not treat you well. I need to understand how I became this way." My breath caught. The message held no excuses, only recognition. I placed the phone on the table. My eyes lingered on it for several moments. A lesson had begun to shape itself in him. A lesson that no argument or lecture could have taught. Pain had opened a door. Silence had held a mirror to his face. My reply would come later, once the words formed with clarity. The fire crackled softly. Wind moved through the trees outside. The world felt wide and open, filled with possibilities I had forgotten existed. The cabin welcomed me like a place that had waited patiently. My journey had not ended. It had changed shape. The life ahead would be quieter, steadier, and built on choices made with intention. Damon would walk his own path now, guided by the consequences he once believed he would never face. I lifted my gaze toward the window. Light from the rising sun touched the lake in soft colors. A sense of quiet victory rose in my chest. Not a victory of revenge, but a victory of self-preservation. A victory of dignity reclaimed. The man I had been in Damon's house had vanished. The man who sat now in this cabin felt steady, grounded, and alive. My story would continue, shaped not by those who failed me, but by the strength I chose to keep. In the end, Harlan's journey offers a quiet reminder that dignity is not something handed to a person. It is something protected, nurtured, and sometimes reclaimed. His story shows that age does not erase strength. It simply shifts its form. A person who finds the courage to step away from harm chooses life in its truest sense. Anyone facing disrespect in their own home should remember that silence is not the only option. Thoughtful action can open a new path. Peace grows when a person gives themselves permission to walk toward it. The audience can carry this with them. Value does not disappear because others fail to see it. Every person deserves a place where they are treated with care, and every person has the right to start again. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need the reminder that strength does not fade with age. Remember to subscribe for more emotional journeys, and leave a comment about the lesson you took from Harlan's path. Your voice helps keep these stories alive.